Emily Carter paid exactly $1,000, her entire savings, to buy a rusted World War II airplane abandoned behind a barn in Montana. The neighbors burst out laughing. "Buying a corpse?" they sneered. But she knew it wasn't a coincidence when she saw the tail number on its fuselage, the same number her husband once spoke of before he died. No one understood. Beneath the peeling paint was an 80-year-old secret, and it was about to save hundreds of lives. No one understood why Emily Carter stopped her truck at an outdoor auction on a bitterly cold day in Montana. Even fewer understood why she raised her hand on the final bid, like she was buying the rest of her life. The airplane slumped behind an abandoned barn. There is a rusty aluminum frame and shattered cockpit glass. One wing is missing entirely. A crooked sign stuck in the grass read, "Old airplane, $1,000, tow it yourself." She didn't need time to think. A few men nearby chuckled. "That's the Carter widow," one said. "Used to be Air Force. Guess her wiring's gone loose." Emily heard every word, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned to live with silence since the day she received the wooden box, the one holding a folded flag and a medal engraved with the name Captain James Carter, her husband. Since then, she had lived alone on the edge of town, picking up odd jobs to survive. Though she'd left the military years ago, she still cleaned her tools with oily rags and brewed strong black coffee each night, like on base. Her last clear memory of James was sitting in the car, one sleepless night. He told her about his grandfather, a World War II pilot named Everett "Red" Carter. James once said, "He flew something different, not like anything the other units had." Then he'd laughed, tapping the steering wheel. "If you ever see it out there, you'll just know." That day, when Emily saw the faint outline 7XH332 beneath a layer of rust, she didn't see scrap metal. She saw a message from the past. She spent her last $1,000 and bought it. She didn't expect anyone to understand. She just knew something deep down was telling her, "Do it." That afternoon, the plane arrived on a rickety flatbed truck and was rolled into place beside an old, empty horse stall behind her house. Emily stood alone, the wind rippling through golden grass, her hand resting gently on the side of the fuselage. Beneath the dust, she felt something waiting to be awakened. The next day, as she scrubbed the tail with a toothbrush, she spotted a faint etching in the metal, like handwriting. She leaned closer, heart racing. It was a name. Everett Carter. The name Everett Carter emerged like a ghost from memory. The hand-carved letters were still visible under the thin layer of dust and rust. Not machine-stamped, not accidental. Someone had once sat here and wanted others to know. Emily dropped to her knees, her toothbrush still in her hand, and her eyes locked on the marking. Cold wind swept in from the fields, carrying the smell of old oil and damp soil. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Red, is it really you?" Everett "Red" Carter, James's grandfather, had only been mentioned 3 times in their marriage. James always said he was an odd man, rarely spoken of in the family. A World War II pilot was listed as missing in action in late 1945. Nobody. No funeral. Just a line in the records. MIA. Emily had always thought it was a distant story. Another half-lost chapter from when no one wanted to remember. But now, kneeling beside a decaying aircraft with that name carved into the frame, something shifted. She spent the entire day cleaning. Not fixing, not disassembling, just cleaning. With soft cloths, small brushes, and folded tissues, Each aluminum panel was a page of time, dusted off like an old skin hiding stories never told. On the third day, while wiping around the cockpit, her hand knocked against a loose piece of metal behind the pilot's seat. She thought it was a broken wire, but when she pulled gently, a hidden compartment snapped open, something not listed on any blueprint. Inside, wrapped carefully in plastic and oilcloth, was a heavy object, a leather-bound notebook, worn at the corners, still tied shut. Emily sat down hard on the cold concrete of the hangar floor. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first page was slanted script, neat, deliberate. Flight Journal, Maggie, Everett R. Carter, 1945. She held her breath. This wasn't a maintenance log. It wasn't a technical checklist. It was a journal. There were poems, rough sketches of a dog curled under a plane's wing, weather notes from Normandy, descriptions of flying through enemy skies, but most importantly, there were hand-drawn schematics, detailed, personal, of the very aircraft she was sitting beside. Halfway through the journal, tucked into the fold of a page, was a line written in red ink. "If you find this journal, keep her alive. She wasn't born to rust in the ground." In the days that followed, Emily all but disappeared from town. She woke before dawn, pulled on her gloves, unlocked the barn, and worked silently. Only the rustle of paper, the squeal of old metal, and the wind slipping through the cracks in the roof kept her company. She taped pages of Everett's journal to the wall, diagrams, sketches, notes. The aircraft wasn't like any model she had studied in the Air Force. Lightweight, unarmed. The rear cabin was designed to hold dozens of small crates. No weapon mounts, no bomb bay, not a combat aircraft, but a relief plane. She didn't understand it fully, but she could feel it. This plane was made for something else. James's grandfather, Everett, had done everything he could to keep that something alive, but it was hidden, waiting. But not everyone saw what she saw. Rumors spread quickly. At the diner down the street, people whispered that Emily had lost her mind. A former military mechanic, now spending her days scrubbing rust and reading old notebooks. Talking to scrap metal, someone said. An old acquaintance, once a squad mate of James, ran into her at the hardware store. Arms crossed, he shook his head. "You planning to spend the rest of your life in that barn? James wouldn't want to see you like this." Emily said nothing. She just pulled the tarp off one wing she'd been restoring. He smirked. "This isn't healing, Emily. This is self-destruction." The words cut deep. That night, Emily didn't work. She didn't clean, didn't read. She just sat in the cockpit, window cracked open, moonlight casting pale streaks across the dusty control panel. Thoughts spiraled. Am I chasing a delusion? Is this just madness disguised as grief? She leaned her head against the glass, closed her eyes. Then, footsteps on gravel. She turned. It was Logan, the 15-year-old neighbor boy who used to play in her yard years ago. He stood at the barn door, hands buried in the pocket of his hoodie, eyes wide with quiet wonder. Do you need help? Help? With the plane? I see you working on it alone all the time." Emily stayed quiet. "Everyone says you're crazy, but I think it's beautiful." Logan stepped inside, looking around like he'd just entered a living museum. He reached out and gently touched one of the drawings on the wall. "Hey, this tail number. I saw it in an old military history book. It used to belong to a secret project?" Logan wasn't joking. The next morning, he returned with a thick, worn book titled War: The Forgotten Projects. He flipped through the pages and pointed to a black and white photo. A group of pilots standing beside an unarmed plane. The caption beneath it read, Prototype 7XH, 1945. Project Haven, decommissioned. Emily stared at the image. The tail number matched. The frame was identical to the plane she was restoring. She flipped back through Everett's journal. There it was, a sketch that looked almost like a blueprint. Compartments, rudder linkage, and a second cockpit. Scrawled in cursive on the side margin, emergency fallback in case of ground contact. Must not fall into the wrong hands. That afternoon, as they unscrewed a panel beneath the cockpit to check the wiring, Logan tapped a piece of metal that felt denser than the rest. This doesn't feel like the others. Emily crouched beside him, flashlight in hand, a small hatch, sealed under layers of paint. The screw holes looked hand-drilled, hidden. She grabbed a screwdriver and began prying at the edges. The panel popped open. Inside was a gray metal container, wrapped in wax and military oilcloth. No markings, no serial number. Emily's heartbeat picked up. She set it on the workbench. Slowly, carefully, she unwrapped it. Inside was a stack of documents, both typed and handwritten, all stamped with the faded insignia of the Army Air Forces, marked, Classified, Do Not Distribute. A black and white photo was at the bottom of the stack, 2 men in flight suits. One of them was unmistakably Everett. The other was unfamiliar, but carried a sharp, intelligent look. On the back of the photo, Red and Max, final test flight, May 1945. Emily skimmed the first few pages, her eyes locked onto a hand-underlined section. Purpose: to deliver medical personnel and relief supplies to liberated concentration camps. No press, no ceremony, only action. The project had been scrapped when the war ended sooner than expected, but Everett had hidden the aircraft. He maintained it with his own money, because he believed the world might need her again. Emily looked at Logan. His eyes were wide, like he was staring at buried treasure. She felt the hairs on her arms stand on end. On the last page of the file, there was only a single faded sentence written in blue ink. If you found this, the promise is now yours. Part 5. The Crisis, 500 words. Emily didn't sleep all night. She spread all the classified Project Haven documents across the floor like puzzle pieces. Every page confirmed one thing. This plane wasn't built for war. It was built for the places no one else could reach, to save lives. And now, if it could fly again, it could save lives. But ideals don't make engines run. The aircraft needed a new fuel system, a secondary control system, and especially a P&W R985 engine, a model discontinued for nearly 50 years. She contacted everyone she could: an aircraft graveyard in Colorado, a private restoration shop in Texas, even a museum in Canada. The answer was always the same: yes, but not cheap. Estimated cost: nearly $1.5 million, money Emily didn't have. One morning, while tracing electrical schematics, she received her mail, an overdue notice from the bank, an unpaid electric bill, and a thrift store flyer, with a photo of her plane printed over the words, Mrs. Carter's Art Project. Someone had snapped a picture of her hangar and posted it to the town's Facebook group. In the comments, dozens of jeers. When's the plane going on patrol? Ask if she can give me a lift to school. Hey, Amelia Heehart, don't forget to buckle up. She didn't read the rest. She just glanced at it, then tossed her phone into the toolbox. That night, as strong winds rattled the barn's tin roof, Emily sat silently in the cockpit, the only light coming from a flashlight taped to a wire. Her hand rested on the control panel. Inside, everything went hollow. For years, she had used work to hide from the pain of losing James. Used this plane as an excuse not to face the emptiness. But how much further could she go? How much could she carry? "Red," she whispered. "Did you really believe I could keep this promise? Or were you just hoping someone else would finish the dream you couldn't?" That night, Emily didn't cry. She just felt cold. As she opened the barn door the next morning, a black SUV rolled up the gravel drive. Two people stepped out, one in a suit, the other carrying a military briefcase. A woman approached, removed her sunglasses, and said evenly, "Mrs. Carter, we need to talk about your plane." Emily froze at the barn door. The black SUV sat silent, like a ghost on the edge of the golden field. The woman in the crisp suit handed her a card. Federal Civil Emergency Response Agency. The man with her said nothing, only placed the military briefcase on the workbench. When he opened it, inside were familiar images. Her plane, inside her hangar, photographed from a distance. "We saw this photo circulating online last week," the woman said. "One of our technicians recognized the tail number 7XH332. It appeared in classified Project Haven files. Files your grandfather-in-law was one of the few to know." Emily swallowed hard. "And now?" The man spoke for the first time. His voice was rough but clear. 3 weeks ago, a chemical plant explosion in Louisiana crippled our entire relief network. Thousands were isolated. Roads washed out. Helicopters couldn't land without pads. We lost nearly 40 people, simply because we couldn't reach them. He looked straight into Emily's eyes. "A plane like yours, if operational, could change the way we respond to disasters." Emily stood silent. They weren't talking about war, no gunpowder, just the heavy silence of lost lives. The woman slid a file across the bench. The cover read, "Proposal, Experimental Partnership, Civilian Asset, Codename, Carter Prototype." "If you agree," she said, "we'll fund the full restoration." "How much?" Emily asked. $1.5 million up front, plus technical support and a test flight permit. In return, 1 flight, in real conditions. If successful, you'll be appointed to lead the expanded model. Emily looked at the file, then at the faded aircraft resting quietly in the barn. She'd been mocked, thought she was chasing a mirage. I thought this was just her way of speaking to someone already gone. But now real people, from the government, were standing in her barn saying, "We need the plane. We need you." From the corner, Logan blurted out, eyes wide, You're actually going to fly it?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She just placed her hand on the fuselage, brushed away a thin layer of dust, and whispered, "No, we are." That morning, the Arkansas sky wasn't clear as forecast. Dark clouds gathered fast, heavy rain pounding, wind lashing in bursts. Massive floods had swallowed dozens of small towns, cutting off every road. Helicopters couldn't land. The terrain was too waterlogged, the wind too fierce. But through the gray sky came an engine sound. Not loud, not modern. A deep, steady thrum, like a heartbeat under the earth. Emily Carter's plane was approaching. No logo, no glossy paint. Just a faded silver fuselage and the old tail number, 7H332. In the cockpit, Emily gripped the yoke. Logan sat beside her, hands trembling slightly but eyes burning bright. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready!" he shouted, rain hissing against the windshield. They flew low, cutting through wind and rain, across drowned fields where rooftops were the only things above water. "First target, Miller High School," Logan read from the tablet. 14 people, no power, no food. Emily dropped lower. Gusts slammed the wings, threatening to tear them, but she held steady, eyes fixed on the drop zone. "Now!" she called. The cargo hatch swung open. A relief crate tumbled out, chute blossoming, landing safely. On a rooftop below, someone raised their arm, waving. Even in the cold rain, they smiled. Emily kept flying. They dropped supplies at 3 more locations: an isolated church, a collapsed bridge, a muddy clearing where nearly 30 people huddled in makeshift tents. 12 crates were enough to help more than 240 people survive 2 days until rescue could arrive. Logan glanced at Emily as if seeing her for the first time. He murmured, eyes on the control panel. She was born for this. Emily only nodded, but inside she heard voices. "Red, do you see? James, I kept the promise." When they returned to the makeshift runway, dozens of relief workers were waiting. No one clapped. No one cheered. They simply stood silent, as if they had witnessed something sacred. A young rescue worker removed his helmet, bowed his head, and whispered to the man beside him, "That's not a plane. That's a miracle." As Emily shut down the engine, she said nothing. She pulled out the old journal and flipped it to Everett's final page. There in the slanted hand, "If anyone still believes, let her fly." The plane was towed back to the Montana barn on a sunny afternoon. No sirens, no media, no crowd waiting. Just Emily, Logan, and the wind sweeping over the fields. The fuselage was still silver, still scarred. But it was no longer mocked as a pile of scrap. People now call it something else. The Angel. And the townspeople, the same ones who had once shaken their heads and laughed, now only watched when Emily passed. No one said sorry. They didn't need to. The silence was enough. A week later, a letter arrived from the Emergency Response Agency. They wanted to expand the model and replicate the idea in other regions. They called the program the Carter Initiative. Emily stared at the bold print, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Logan was ecstatic. He darted around the hangar, sketching improvements and making replacement parts lists. His eyes lit up every time he mentioned the next flight. Emily stayed quiet. One evening, she was the last to leave. The hangar lights dimmed. The wind outside whispered through the gaps in the wall like a voice long gone. She placed her hand on the fuselage, the exact spot where she had first wiped away dust. "Red," she murmured. "I kept the promise. I didn't let her die. She saved lives, just like you dreamed." She opened Everett's journal one last time. The final page held only one line. "True value isn't in appearances. It's in daring to believe, even when the world doubts." She closed the book and set it on the pilot's seat. It was no longer a journal. It was a testament. The next morning, Emily mounted a small plaque beside the hangar door. A piece of brass engraved with simple words. "The Carter Project, for all who keep believing." People began to come. Veterans, retired engineers. Boys like Logan from across the country want to learn how to make planes live again. They called Emily the Keeper of the Flame. She just smiled and shook her head. "I didn't make the plane fly. She lifted me off the ground.